Hi everyone, in this video I have with me Tarot of the New Vision. This is one of the tarot set which I've rummaged through as I'm tidying up my cupboard and managed to find and dig out. They're sitting in a pile of other decks which I am deciding whether I am keeping or passing along. And so I've sat on this and I couldn't make up my mind for the longest time because the artwork isn't quite my style. I bought this when I first started learning tarot about 2 years ago, but it has its, I relied on the handbook for a long time. When I cross deck and handbook, I relied on this handbook for several other decks and cross-reference or pollinate that way. And it has been it was very useful and productive as someone who just started learning at the time. Oh, I have, excuse me, I'm just taking off my sweater again. I have recently taken a second look on this deck, and I've decided that it still have a lot more to teach me, and it is a good tool for me to constantly be reminded that you can try to imagine a three-dimensional world around the scenes depicted in each card, especially that of Pamela Colman Smith, because she was indeed a theater set, a designer, I believe, or whether she can be called a set designer or whether she basically just illustrates the sceneries that people use on stage, I'm not sure. So it goes like that, and it has that book. I highly recommend, I must say, I will try to read for a few cards, but judging from the book, I think the cards can benefit a lot from the book. I personally can only comment that this is a very productive learning tool if you have the book. Otherwise, the deck can feel a little gimmicky. So, once again, I think the book is key. So let me give you a quick flip through over this. So, as you can see, it's no explanation necessary because it's basically just giving you a point of view from a different direction. So that's from the back. That's inside the church instead of outside. There is that spirit that floating there, which we can't see. We're standing in front of him. It's that two people looking quite nervous there about the choices that he's going to make. Is that Pegasus, or I'm not sure. I have to read the book again. It's been a while, I have to say. And so my point of view have shifted, and my understanding of tarot have evolved as well, so that I think if I read the book again, I may take from the book quite differently the things that I've taken perhaps 2 years ago. So as I said, I think the book is probably quite essential, because otherwise, if it's just a deck, it can sadly look like it's gimmicky. Isn't that interesting that the city that he's leaving is celebrating something there? So that's not a pretty ominous, that's a pretty ominous card with that thing floating on top of her, or him. So it's just the scenes around, that you wouldn't have otherwise, that wouldn't have otherwise be visible to you from the point of view of Pamela Colman Smith, from the point of view where she presented the scenes from. So that's interesting. But also, I will try to read, as I've probably already said, I'll try to read from the book. Like this one here, the book said something about the fact that this guy's not alone, that on the other side, outside that scene that we usually saw on Pamela Colman Smith's depiction of the Eight of Pentacles, or Waite's depiction of it, because Waite obviously have the approving, Pamela Colman Smith is the hand who does the job, and Waite's the one who directed her, so he's like the director. You have other people working on this whatever project that these guys are working, so that gives it that different layer. It's an interesting turtle behind the Emperor. And the book has a lot to say about stone, snake, dove, and those things. I mean, most recent self-published or thematic or whatever you want to call it tarot decks have that kind of spin on the basic structures and the basic meanings anyway, based on the authors. But this is presented, I thought, is in a unique and quite smart way. I don't know if the usual hermit has snake with him as well or not. in that it uses the scene that we are so very fond and very, very familiar with, that we've been ingrained. That's another, usually you see from that side. That we have been ingrained with for about 100 years, and usually we're him, I think. The way I see it, we're usually coming from behind him, or we are him. So that's an interesting point of view. Yeah, so what they're doing here isn't unique to most recent tarot decks. A lot of creators have their own layer and point of view, and these guys just do it using the classic imageries. So that makes it an interesting. It gives it an interesting dynamic when we look at the images. Interestingly, that's Hercules, and if you look at the Marseille decks with someone almost as if they're beating an animal, I think that particular strength card, I think, depict Hercules, I think, and so the fact that he's up there is interesting. Again, that snake, and I don't remember from our usual point of view from the front, I don't remember a snake, but I could be wrong. So the Fool, you see that exploding, erupting volcano in front of him, and he's stepping over anyway. It just makes it, the Fool just makes it more the Fool, I guess. If he's not only stepping over a cliff, he's moving towards a erupting volcano. The book has something to say about that, and I can't read them all, so I'm going to pick from a few cards which intrigued me the most, which is this one here, because they look like they're slaves, and the fact that she's half naked somewhat disturbed me when I first saw it. Hold on a second. And the Magician, and then there is those two. And so, the back, I found that some people have different backs, so maybe because I have the book and deck set and the back's like that, maybe because it's a different edition that Los Caribbean have done, I'm not quite sure. So let's see what the book has to say about, first of all, the Chariot up here. So the Chariot, it says, a triumphant chariot slowly makes its way through a celebrating crowd, pulling behind it a half-naked man and woman in chains. The canopy covering the chariot is decorated with blue material adorned with stars. This removable structure is an allusion to the interior sky, the psyche and human soul. More precisely, the highest part of the canopy refers to the spiritual dimension, while the inside is the intellectual dimension. Let's stop to look at this last aspect and its important premise. The sky of the mind. The human intellect owns more than just the cognitive functions, the ability to learn, to memorize, to form abstractions, and analyze. There is another fundamental gift, the critical spirit. It is a gift that allows us to exchange opinions with others and analyze ourselves. Most people use all these functions quite independently, though not always instinctively. But the great masters of life in any age have taught us to avoid this error. Without going too far, it is enough to remember Plato, who taught the four fundamental virtues: strength, justice, prudence, and temperance must guide every thought and every act, a sentiment hinted at by the four pillars supporting the canopy. The bridles of will. Even the front of the chariot has connections to Platonic teaching. We can't see it here because it is portrayed differently from the traditional card. Seen from the front, the chariot shows two horses, or two sphinxes, of different colors, normally black and white. In a famous story, Plato explained that the soul is like a chariot pulled by two horses going in opposite directions. A person's will, however, drives the chariot in the right direction. The character in the chariot is the Gnostic, who has learned to keep his passion in check, moderate his gestures, judge fairly, look at the past, and head into the future. It is the light of intelligence that shines on his head. The Urim and the Thummim, the ancient Hebrew symbols of the mysteries of being, are conspicuous on his shoulders. The warrior on the chariot is a conqueror in every respect, in intellectual matters, in science, in certain tests of initiation, and in day-to-day life. As Arthur E. Waite explained, he has answered the Sphinx's riddles, and this explains why there are two sphinxes pulling his chariot. The white one symbolizes good, and the black one evil. Necessary slavery. While only a glimpse of the sphinxes can be seen here, we can see the chariot driver pulling the two slaves in golden chains, the symbol of will illuminated by grace. These two characters represent all inner and outer polarities, male, female, reason, sentiment, etc. While these cannot be eliminated, the chariot driver has learned to dominate and balance them. The slave's partial nudity means their polarities have been identified. Recognizing one's own defects, and limits is the first step towards overcoming them, just as recognizing an enemy's power is an indispensable step toward facing that enemy with the proper arms. The color of their clothes, red for passion and green for desire, underline the nature of the inner conflicts and the aggression that the Gnostic was able to resolve. There is, however, a risk even in victory. The ecstasy of early success, if not moderated, can trigger a reversal, just as harnessed passion can limit progress. So that's that. And then let's see what it has to say about the magician. The magician. It's because I'm intrigued by the monkey. So I saw that and I thought, what's that monkey's about? With the chariot, I was a little perplexed and a little disturbed by this sort of slave-looking people and the half-naked woman. I found that a bit. And then after I read that makes sense. The magician. A man in white wearing a heavy full-length red cloak around his shoulders stands upright in front of a group of people who seems to be hypnotized. He could be a skilled illusionist or conjurer, but his gestures would suggest he is a magician. Magical gestures and instruments. His right hand holds a large baton up to the sky, while his left index finger points to the ground. In esoteric tradition, this double gesture is associated with drawing heavenly virtues down to the earthly plane. If this man were a fraud, however, the same gesture could serve to distract the audience's attention in order to pull off a trick. Even the instruments he uses reflect his ambiguity. The cup and magical pentacle on the table are objects used in mystical rites, as well as in prestidigitation. The same is true for the baton and the sword at the magician's feet, as they are needed to attract and repel spiritual energies, but may also be used in theatrical games. These four objects correspond to tarot suits, and at the same time represent the magician's supreme formula of quote-unquote knowing, wanting, daring, keeping secret, knowledge off limits to charlatans. The roses separating the magician from the audience imply his special condition. These are flowers of the initiated, symbols of inner transformation as well as spiritual and psychic regeneration, whereas the thorns symbolize both inner and outer obstacles yet to be overcome and those sacrifices needed to better oneself. The divine monkey. There is another element that throws a shade of ambiguity on this figure, the monkey hiding behind the magician and pulling at a fold in his cloak to get his attention. The monkey in Christian symbolism is the human being trying to imitate his creator. In ancient Egypt, however, this animal was linked to the knowledge of Thoth, the magician god frequently represented with a baboon head. The lewd and argumentative god Baba was also represented with a monkey. Basically, the monkey we see behind our magician could indicate two opposing tendencies present in us all. On one hand, our desire for spiritual elevation through virtuous practice, and on the other, our tendency to give in to our lowest instincts. Ambiguous charm. The strange halo-like form over his head, a figure 8 on its side, symbol of eternity, indicates the dimension towards which this fascinating character's thoughts are directed. One must not, however, believe the magician is motivated exclusively by good or evil, for like anyone, he is perpetually torn between the two. While he desires to draw closer to the divine world, he is constantly subject to temptations that take him off the path to self-improvement. The magician's personality. His willpower, his creativity, and his ability to communicate with and seduce the people he meets makes a magician an individual. He demonstrates these talents in every situation. The magician has clear goals. In order to achieve them, he has learned how to control words, gestures, and emotions. Or maybe he is the Gnostic, someone in search of real knowledge. And then it sort of have main meanings and then opposition, which I assume is reversed.